Welcome back. A shocking announcement out of Ukraine today. The country's President Volodymyr Zelensky announcing that Russia is plotting a coup against him. Moscow correspondent Julia Chapman has details.
After weeks of concern about a Russian military buildup on the Ukrainian border, the attention has now shifted to the Russian rhetoric, the words coming out of the Kremlin and being heard by other Russian officials in Moscow. The Kremlin has moved from accusing the West of hysteria to accusing Ukraine of a provocation. Other Russian officials have referred to creeping advances being made by the Ukrainian military, while others have pointed to instability in Ukraine being fomented by the delivery of Western weapons to the country, which some have suggested is a pretext for a possible invasion. Of course, Russia denies that any such invasion is planned. And indeed, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky does say that the threat from Russia at the moment is no greater than it was earlier this year, but it is a constant threat level that Ukraine says it has to deal with. And on top of that, President Zelensky also referred to a coup attempt that he said was being plotted against him to be carried out next week. Now, he didn't accuse the Russian government outright of plotting that coup attempt, but he did refer to tape recordings with Russian-speaking voices involved in the plotting. So certainly tensions continuing to grow between these two countries, with, of course, Ukraine really depending on backing from NATO countries, from the US itself, if there were to be any kind of an infiltration by Russian troops, which, of course, Moscow denies is going to happen. Back to you.
Julia Chapman, thank you. And joining me now is Rebekah Koffler. She is a former DIA intelligence officer and author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. And Rebekah, thanks for joining us tonight. Can you give us any idea of Putin's motivations here? Zelensky says he received audio intelligence that the coup is planned for the 1st or 2nd of December, and that means next week.
Of course. Good evening, Logan. Pleasure to be here. None of it is a surprise. Has always been Putin's ambition to reintegrate, quote unquote, former Soviet states such as Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, etc., into the so-called Eurasian Union, and to recreate in some shape or form the former Soviet Union. The Russians have always perceived Ukraine as part of its security perimeter, and Putin has drawn a red line in terms of NATO and the United States intervening in the conflict. So it is really dangerous, the escalatory movements that Putin right now is taking.
But Rebekah, also why now specifically? We know that nothing happened with this Russian aggression to this point under the Trump administration. Zelensky became the president of Ukraine then. Keep in mind, he's a former comedian, so maybe that's another reason why Putin thinks he can be aggressive. But Biden has been the president of the U.S. for 11 months now. Why are they acting now?
It is not because Zelensky is a former comedian. His words should be taken at face value, really. It's really because the Russians have concluded that President Biden and his national security apparatus are weak in terms of Russia policy, despite the false narrative that we heard from pundits and the media that former President Trump was soft on Russia. Former President Trump's policy has really been the strongest since Ronald Reagan. President Biden's foreign policy towards Russia has really gifted Putin things like the waiving of the sanctions from the Nord Stream. And that is very important because the profits that go from that pipeline flow directly into Russian military modernization programs that are targeting the United States in the conflict. And that's what my book is about. So the reason why Putin is acting up right now is because he's perceiving a very narrow window of opportunity during Biden's presidency that he perceives as weak. And also, the Russian intelligence services have assessed President Biden to possibly be cognitively compromised. So Putin wants to exploit this window of opportunity, just like he did back in 2014 during the Obama administration when he took over Ukraine's Crimea. That's the reason.
And that's a pattern, too, you're hearing, Rebekah. China sees that there's weakness. Russia sees weakness. Iran sees weakness. That's why these countries are all acting more aggressively. But another question for you, too. A State Department official says all options are on the table for how the U.S. will respond to this Russia aggression. What do you think the United States will do if they get involved in this debacle?
I don't think the United States is able to do much, to be honest with you. As a former DIA intelligence officer who participated in more than a dozen Russia-U.S. war games simulating a conflict between the United States and nuclear Russia, I'll tell you this. If you think that the losses that we incurred during the 20 years of our incursion in Afghanistan, which cost us 6,000 American lives, and $2.2 trillion, you ain't seen nothing yet. You know, the losses that the United States would experience in terms of participating or intervening rather in a conflict with Russia on Ukraine's behalf would be catastrophic. And it is for that reason I don't believe we can do much. Just like President Biden has not really been able to respond in any way to Russia's crippling cyber attacks on the United States. In the same manner, we're simply not prepared because our Pentagon is more focused on indoctrinating officers in Marxist ideology than teaching them how to win battles.
Well, Rebekah, thank you so much for your insight. We hope people check out your book, Putin's Playbook, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Logan.